everyone. Ko Natalie Ward toku ingoa. My name is Natalie and I'm a Senior Business Development Manager here at Toitū Envirocare, and I'm your host for today's webinar. So we have loads of you joining us today for this 1 hour webinar on building a sustainable future, tools to decarbonise the construction industry. Now, just before we get started, just some quick housekeeping. So this session is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you all as well. We also have some time for some questions at the end, so please use the Q&A feature down the bottom of your screen. Any questions that we don't get round to answering will be sent through with the webinar link later this week as well. So for the agenda today, we're going to discuss the climate context, the built environment's impact, and how the sector can recover sustainably. We'll also talk about the private and public industry requirements, as well as the built environment solutions. We'll then jump into a more technical aspect with some LCA basics, benefits, and the tools available. And finally, we'll hear from Precinct Properties before opening up to a Q&A at the end. So on to our fantastic speakers. I'm joined today by Josh McGlone, who is one of our team leaders for our technical account managers. He has a specific focus on manufacturing and the built environment. Josh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. So I come from a background in sustainability in the built environment, with about 7 years experience between Australia and New Zealand, supporting the development of sustainable strategies and undertaking certification for sustainability. So I have some particular experience delivering analysis and optimization for the built environment, including operational efficiency analysis, embodied efficiency, so looking at some of the LCA and embodied carbon, as well as doing climate adaptation, among other things.
Awesome, thanks Josh. We also have Abbas Tamadon, who is a Senior Advisor in LCA and Tools. Abbas, over to you.
Thanks very much. Kia ora koutou, ko Abbas aho. Thanks everyone for joining us for today's session. So yeah, I'm Abbas with extensive knowledge on LCA. So my background in LCA comes about 5 years ago, starting the research in university, and after that some R&D roles, data analytics roles in industry, focusing on construction sector, EPDs, developing the EPDs, carbon emission, embodied emission, all different kind of projects that construction and demolishing sector in New Zealand needs that. And the main focus of my research and my project was on New Zealand sector. So quite happy to go through the LCA and to see what we need for our construction industry in New Zealand. Thanks.
Wonderful. And finally, we're joined by the wonderful Lisa Hinde, who's the Head of Sustainability at Precinct Properties. Lisa, do you want to do a short intro?
Sure. Kia ora koutou. I am Australian, so it's not lost on me that the majority of the audience is probably Kiwi, so I'll attempt to keep my accent fairly neutral. So I've had the incredible pleasure of working in the sustainability industry, specifically in property for 12 years. So first for an engineering consultancy and then a commercial agency heading up sustainability consulting teams. I joined Precinct in July, so moved across, and I'm really keen to see where we can take the property sector here as it relates to the construction industry in carbon reductions, and yeah, just really keen for the discussion today. So thanks for the intro.
Thanks, Lisa. All right, to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to Josh and Abbas.
Thank you, Natalie. I will share my screen and we'll get cracking. Cool. All right. So welcome everyone. Let's get stuck into this webinar. I'm going to start with some context. If I can get through, here we go. So as we may know, and probably have all experienced, 2023 wasn't exactly a great year for our local climate. We've experienced record-breaking downpours from atmospheric rivers and extratropical cyclones, dropping more than a year's worth of rain in a few months. Not to mention, as we can see pictured here, the devastation of Cyclone Gabrielle. So following all that, and to just make it a bit more pessimistic, we're set to have the hottest year on record, despite breaking the record last year already. So two record-breaking hottest years in a row. With the current climate trends, these impacts on average are set to get worse rather than better, and a clear and present reminder of why we need to minimize our environmental impact. So where does the construction industry play into this? So the construction industry actually has a significant impact on both how we adapt to the climate as well as how we mitigate our impact. So today we're going to be focusing mostly on that mitigation part. So depending on how it's measured, currently the built environment accounts for between 8.2 to 20% of our national carbon emissions, with a standalone house built today emitting up to 6.7 times the allowable limit or budget of emissions it can emit if we are to achieve our 1.5 degree warming targets. Without direct action to mitigate these emissions, the sector's emissions are likely to only increase as we try to tackle demand of an ever-growing world with a housing and construction deficit. So how do we actually recover sustainably, given the devastation occurring here in Aotearoa and more widely abroad, as well as the impact the built environment has had and continues to have on the climate? How do we actually approach this, recovering from these events within the construction sector so as to reverse the trend towards the climate catastrophe? When it comes to the built environment, that means really investigating the complex nature of our assets, as well as the supply and value chains associated with them. In many sectors, the operational impacts are becoming more efficient, with many solutions well understood and accepted by the industry. We've seen this with buildings considering orientation and other elements of passive design, improving glazing or window systems, as well as additional insulation, and also procuring higher efficiency systems, including low efficient light fittings. But what about the rest of the built environment's impact? So as our buildings and infrastructure become more efficient in operation, the relative importance of the embodied carbon within the sector will actually play a much more important role in the decarbonisation effort to minimise the sector's climate impact. So the graph shown here from MB's Building for Climate Change program shows the life cycle of a building, more or less, similar to other forms of infrastructure. So as the green kind of graphs there, green bars there shrink, the relative impact of those blue bars, so the embodied carbon, actually increases. So it's more and more important that as we go through implementing a lot of these understood efficiencies in the operational space, that we actually look at that embodied carbon. So what can the sector do to support some reductions in this space? Well, there's a whole lot of green building certification programs out there that the private sector has put together. And there's a significant range, as you can see some of them on screen today. These range from the local authority with the New Zealand Green Building Council and their rating tools, as well as some from the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, with the IS rating down the bottom right, and international ones with, for example, the Living Future Institute there and the Living Building Challenge that they offer. So these certifications provide the framework for decarbonisation and various different elements of projects, as well as supporting wider sustainability benefits. So they do other efficiencies around energy and water, or assess those, as well as look at the biodiversity impacts and health and social impacts. But all these certifications currently do, or will likely in the future, include embodied carbon analysis. Currently, NABERS NZ and the Net Zero building certifications in the middle there don't actually include embodied carbon. But taking Australia as an example, where NABERS comes from, their NABERS in Australia is actually developing and is currently investigating the release of a embodied carbon tool, which is incredibly interesting. So we've seen quite a significant increase in the uptake of a lot of these certifications in recent years across the board, in particular those delivered by the NZGBC or New Zealand Green Building Council, such as Green Star, Homestar and NABERS New Zealand, as well as the IS ratings have been delivered or have been committed to for quite a few projects from Waka Kotahi. So then there's also the regulatory context. So MB, one of the more important regulatory bodies when it comes to the built environment, maintains and updates the building code, and has implemented a program to significantly improve the building code to meet the sustainability challenges of the industry. So the Building for Climate Change program, established in 2020, has the aim of guiding the building and construction sector to achieve its contribution to New Zealand's emissions reduction targets and make sure our buildings are prepared for changing climatic conditions. Originally built with embodied carbon and operational efficiency focus, building adaptation and climate resilience has been incorporated into the program as well. I hope you can still see my screen. Something's going on wrong on my end, but I'm going to continue through as if that's all good. So the Building for Climate Change program is intended to be implemented in stages, initially with operational resource constraints. So you can see a bit of an indicative timeline that they've proposed out in front. So these include energy and water limits that maintain reasonable amenity and healthy interior environments. This is followed by embodied carbon limits through to 2040. And it is intended that the public sector will implement some of these targets at a stage prior to the private sector, just to kind of lead the way. At least that is the current intention. Then there's also regulation for the government itself. So in terms of the public sector, the Carbon Neutral Government Program provides another layer of sustainable. Okay, good. Just checking that everything was all good. Provides another level of sustainable development requirements influencing the industry. So the program establishes the organizational carbon emissions reporting controls and applies several additional requirements, including NABERS NZ ratings for offices, sustainable building rating certifications for new developments, generally Green Star currently, to measure and report on embodied carbon emissions. Excuse me. Follow sustainable construction practices. In addition to the Carbon Neutral Government Program, some other departments have specific sustainability requirements, including Waka Kotahi's requirement for infrastructure sustainability certification and Kāinga Ora's requirement to achieve 6-star Homestar certification in their developments. So where does Toitū Envirocare fit into this context? So Toitū works with industry leaders supporting measurement and verification of their carbon inventory, including in the construction and built environments. Through these assessments, development of more specific data in New Zealand context can be developed, which is critical for further decarbonisation of the built environment. The current context without comprehensive data makes the determination of low carbon designs and products difficult. So Toitū can support in conducting life cycle assessments for products and the built environment to help establish this database. Now to jump into a bit more detail, I'll pass across to our resident life cycle expert, Abbas, who will take you more into a deep dive.
Thanks, Josh. And yeah, I also ask you to stay with me to manage my slides. So yeah, we will go through the life cycle assessment. So the next slide, we have a brief explanation about, okay, what is life cycle assessment and why this is important for construction sector. So the life cycle assessment gives you this opportunity to measure your carbon footprint, or what we say emission, for different life stages of your project or your building or construction. And also this LCA measurement, so life cycle assessment, will give you this opportunity to recognize where is more important to be focused and provide a better solution, basically a reduction of the carbon. Something that we have it here. Okay. Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, what we need to say, first of all, so the reduction of the embodied emission. So the embodied emission here, I am sorry, just a technical issue with the video, but it's okay now. Yeah. Yeah, why we need the reduction of embodied emission? Basically based on our commitment for the net carbon zero, the future in 2050, we need to achieve in some spots to that goals. So at the moment, the situation shows that the embodied emission for construction sector is somewhere that need to think about the solution. So reducing the embodied emission for a sustainable practice, and this shows that the current measurements and the minimum standards that we have it now is not potentially enough for the future of sustainable building or sustainable construction, as we say. So a greener building movement, it needs to adopt a comprehensive approach. LCA provides that to meet the sustainability goals that we need for the future. So the Toitū will support the analysis, LCA analysis for the construction to measure the emissions and to demonstrate the current situation, the current level of the emission for your project or for our industry, and the challenges that we will have for the sustainable future. So our robust tools, LCA tools that we develop here, provide enough capability for a net carbon zero program in the future to footprint your system, your projects, and also give this insurance for the development of the carbon reduction pathway for the future of our construction industry. In the next slide, I will be more focused on the differences in the LCA. So most of us, we heard about the LCA, so it was just kind of a short explanation about it. EPDs and different other kind of like documentations or programs for the sustainability in construction sector. So the difference is the general LCA, difference between LCA and EPD will be in the framework of the work. So basically LCA has a more comprehensive border for framework that will cover all these environmental factors during the whole life cycle of the building. It will include not only materials, energy use in the user stage, water consumption, emission, end of the life, and different scenarios that we have for the end of the life. But EPD will be mainly focused on product-based life cycle. So it's still really standardized and comprehensive. Environmental metrics is perfect and provide a depth information and measurement, but mainly will be focused on built environment or building products. So what we have it here, probably we can say, okay, the Toitū is thinking about a solution, a practical solution for your organization based on your services and the project that you have in industry and the level of the details that you require for your project. So if in general an organization needs a large scale development, a full LCA can cover perfectly with all the options that we need to consider the measurements and the perspectives of the sustainability. But if your industry mainly is focusing on manufacturing or product level based services, so yeah, still the framework of the life cycle will be focused on, more emphasized on your material selection. And this is what is similar to the tailoring for like kind of like EPD projects. In the next slide, I will show some of the clues or ideas about the LCA for building. So we are focusing on LCA for building. We need to have a whole building LCA that goes for a comprehensive methodology from raw materials extraction, going through the manufacturing, construction phase, use phase, and end of the life demolishing, and all those scenarios and how these emission factors that comes through the footprinting can affect actually the sustainability of the projects, and what can be effective tool that we need for embodied emission for the building. So minimizing, first of all, managing and minimizing the embodied emission is really crucial and important based on the materials and construction methods that we have. So the LCA measurements can give some ideas about the level of emission, providing a transparent and standard information and framework for that. And yeah, to see environmental performance that we need for the construction material, how should we adjust for the project. So based on the software tools that we have, and again, during the project conversation with your building experts, we will integrate all LCA data for a decision-making procedure for your projects. That will help a lot for the future of the sustainability. And effectively, we can address all the emissions that comes from the building and carbon accounting, how to measure them, manage them, and ultimately goes through the pathway to reduce the footprint of the construction. Next slide, please. And yeah, here we have, so basically the framework and the LCA modules for the building sector. So from the left to right, we have different stages. First of all, product stage and construction. In these two sectors, mainly what is EPD is focused on, cradle to gate LCA module is focused on, and all of those sections use the stage and also end of the life and circularity. That will include a comprehensive whole building LCA or cradle to gate LCA that can be covering a comprehensive measurement for your construction project. We will discuss further about these different stages of the building life cycle. The next slide, we go with some of the capabilities available in Toitū, that how we can support actually the construction industry. So we develop LCA building tool. So what it needs to be available in this tool. So it's a cutting edge LCA platform. It's a software for the building and infrastructure, allowing all the clients to quantify and understand about their emission of their construction project. So, and also empowering you to assess based on the LCA module cradle to grave, if you want to go for a full LCA measurement, or based on your products, probably a cradle to gate, something that we have similarly in like EPD or other carbon footprinting projects available. And yeah, at the end, by the results, you will be driven to a sustainable decision making. And the importance of embodied emission here in building, what everyone is at the moment focusing on, embodied emission, not only not towards the full LCA. So the importance of embodied emission will be also, our LCA platform will support embodied emission measurements as well, going to address all the impact assessments that is required for the material selections, for the methods and construction and overall life cycle of the building. So by employing the LCA tools that we offer, you will be able to hotspot and measure the highest levels, the places or the spots that higher level of the emission is happening in your project. And we'll go to target them, address them, and provide a solution to reduce the embodied emission for the future of sustainability. This will also, at the end of the story, LCA measurements and decision making will reduce the embodied emission, and this is what we need for a greener future of the industry. Next slide, I can explain a little bit about the next slide.
Can you see the next slide? The development of life cycle assessment, construction, demolition.
Okay, yes, thanks. Yeah, so here, there are different scenarios also that is inherently relevant to LCA for construction. So construction and demolition, and when we say building, not only building sector, so construction always also infrastructure and different stages of the services of the building, all can be included in this sector. So one of the questions will be probably waste minimization and decarbonization. So potential of waste minimization in reducing the emission, the total emission, and how it can goes towards the promotion of the net zero emission. That is absolutely essential, and it will help the decarbonization plan. So that is also one of the scenarios that our LCA tools will consider that for your construction project. So there are also mix of circularity based on the waste minimization, reprocessing, sending the waste to the landfill, or if we're coming to the circular solutions, that is also crucial for LCA of the building, that we consider solutions and calculations in our tools. So the waste collection and reprocessing compared to landfilling, which one is better? So stage C of the building LCA will cover those scenarios for waste. However, the waste is not only limited to the end of the life. During the use services also, we have repairment, replacement, maintenance, etc. All of those activities, and also even manufacturing and construction site procedures, all produce the waste, and we need to have the solutions for that. This is where our LCA develop tools, compared to the current LCA measurements, can provide a better assessment on your waste and the scenarios that you have for that, to show that how the LCA measurements can provide the emission, the total emission, and different scenarios, adjusting the emission for your project. Landfilling is the best one, or any other solutions for reduction of the carbon emission, and also scenario of circularity. So potentially circularity aims to reduce the emission in construction sector. So the mainly is recycling, reusing, or recovery of the materials at the end of the life to eliminate some of the material-based emission and energy-based emission for your total LCA, total carbon emission. However, based on local sectors that we have, we should consider a case-by-case basis for the circularity scenario, but that is also one of the capabilities of LCA, to show that how circularity, our LCA tools, to show that how circularity can help the reduction of the scenarios for the reduction of the emission of your building. So this was a kind of like generic information about our tools, about what it can cover, and actually we developed this LCA tool based on the current needs of New Zealand industries. And definitely with further discussion, with further development, we will go towards a more effective and fast and comprehensive, reliable LCA tool for construction sector. Thanks, Josh. And I think we can pass to Lisa.
Wonderful. Thanks, Josh and Abbas. We'll now hear from Lisa, who's going to provide us some insight into the work that Precinct Properties have been doing. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. I'm getting an error that says, oh no, there I am. Okay, cool. Hi. So who is Precinct Properties? We are a specialist city centre real estate investment company with operations in Auckland and Wellington. So we're NZX listed, and the majority of our shareholders are in New Zealand. We're focused on sustainability and creating communities with a long-term view. And so with this in mind, we design, develop, own and manage, and we do this alongside trusted partners, including iwi, our occupiers, funders and community. So as part of our role as city shapers, we take it very seriously, and this includes ensuring we're leading the industry around measuring and proactively reducing our carbon impacts across key material areas of our business. And one of the underpinning commitments in the carbon space that we have is our commitment to the World Green Building Council net zero buildings by 2030. So we're the only Kiwi property company to commit to this. And as part of it, there are a number of metrics, but one of the key ones just around our new development pipeline is the minimum 5-star Green Star rating for all new developments. So this translates to upfront and operational carbon reductions. Anyone who's had part of or being part of a Green Star project knows that they have quite stringent energy efficiency and also material requirements just around the building itself, but also materials and equipment related to carbon reductions. So when Abbas was talking about life cycle assessments, that's quite common within the Green Star context, and particularly with the introduction of the Green Star new buildings tool next year, there'll be even more stringent requirements around these components. We've taken a bit of an extension on that to go a step further by calculating and offsetting embodied carbon emissions from our developments. So we see this as a really great way to incentivize embodied carbon reductions for these projects to promote the use of a return on investment, particularly on utilising low carbon design, materials and construction processes. So where we know we've got a really high impact area to manage, we can work upfront to mitigate those challenges, and that has a direct impact on our bottom line in terms of that development project, because we will offset that development at the end of the project. And so that's directly related to our Scope 3 emissions. In an operational sense, we're also targeting 100% of the existing portfolio to achieve at least a 4-star NABERS NZ energy base building rating. And some of these assets are not your new shiny buildings. So we have that target to achieve minimum 4-star by 2030. We're also reducing HFCs or hydrofluorocarbons or using alternatives. And we're investing in and implementing renewable infrastructure where feasible. And so that's all part of our World Green Building Council Net Zero Buildings commitment. However, in addition to the World Green Building Council commitment, we're also running an analysis on adaptive reuse as an upfront carbon reduction tool for new development projects. So where it's more beneficial to retain the existing structure or some of the structure, we will. Purchasing and applying renewable energy certificates generated in New Zealand to 100% of electricity procured each year for our portfolio. So running that analysis and purchasing renewable energy certificates. We're strategically cycling out gas-based equipment in our operational buildings to directly reduce our Scope 1. And we're also conscious that our clients occupying our buildings have a large role to play in helping us decarbonise. So we're committing to regular reporting on ESG metrics to support their endeavours as well, knowing that when we are more transparent about our operations, our occupiers will come along for the journey with us and want to decarbonise as well. And most importantly, as part of this session, it would be remiss of me not to mention that we measure, reduce and offset our Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions through our Toitū Carbon Zero certification. So we've been reporting our emissions through this program since 2020, and that dates back to the FY19 period. And we've committed to using Toitū as part of our ongoing voluntary and mandatory greenhouse gas emissions reporting commitments, particularly as a reporting entity under the new climate disclosure requirements. So as a summary to all of that, it's no secret that carbon measurement, particularly with ongoing reductions in mind and disclosure to third parties, is dominating the real estate industry. And it's not only here in New Zealand, but also in the global context. And so when we talk Scope 1 emissions, we mean fuels that are directly consumed by our organisation, so gas used in our boilers. When we talk Scope 2, we mean impacts from indirect emissions generated from purchased energy, so our electricity procurement. And when we talk Scope 3 emissions, we mean indirect emissions from up and down the supply chain. And it's emissions that we don't have direct operational control over, but they're in our sphere of operating. So our biggest challenge is, unsurprisingly, our Scope 3 emissions. And we have an extensive supply chain across development, construction and operations. So it is a big task for any organisation to tackle. However, this is also our greatest opportunity. So we will lead with intention to first understand the intensity of our Scope 3 emissions and where they are, and through our procurement and supply chain engagement, work with those networks to decarbonise. We know with the clean grid that New Zealand has here and the ingenuity of our partners that the supply chain is an exceptional position to adapt and support this work. So we know that we're in a really good position to really lead this and particularly encourage this with our supply chain. But we also acknowledge the very real market forces both here and overseas that are responding really favourably to, in a commercial sense, to the decarbonisation that businesses are undertaking. So essentially riding that wave to decarbonise together is where we definitely want to see our efforts focused. And so with that, I'll pass it back to the wonderful Toitū team and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Lisa. I think it's really great to hear your perspective. And obviously Precinct's journey as well, which hopefully, as our audience can see, there's always more to do. It's just a matter of getting started. Before we jump to Q&A, I've got a cheeky question for you, Lisa. Is there any insight that you can provide on the downtown development that was announced last week that Precinct are taking on?
No, I cannot. I appreciate the question. No, but we're very excited. Cool. It's going to be such a big impact to the Auckland CBD, and there are some published sustainability targets that we're working towards, and just that commitment in terms of bringing our partners along for the ride is such a big part of that. So watch this space, but yes, we're very, very excited.
Awesome, absolutely, and congratulations on that win as well. All right, on to some questions. I can see we've had a couple come through already, so please keep using the Q&A box down the bottom of the screen as well. And just a reminder, any questions that we don't have time for today will be answered when we send through the recording. So our first question I'm going to open this one to the floor. This was submitted during the registration process. So what is the level of maturity in New Zealand construction industry, both measuring full value chain emissions and having science-aligned reductions? Josh, you want to take this one first?
Yeah, sure. So it's still quite a relatively new thing for the industry in general. It's something that we're all getting our head around, including, as you just heard from Precinct, they're getting head around kind of what the Scope 3 is and trying to establish things, and they're doing some excellent work in that space. But it is a new area that we're all moving through, so it's not incredibly mature yet, but nor is it generally internationally. So we're all working through this process to understand it, and there's a whole lot of great tools out there that can kind of guide you in the right direction. So if you are interested in it, do reach out to us and we can direct you to a lot of different places which can provide you a whole lot of guidance.
Wonderful. Abbas, Lisa, anything to add to that?
Yeah, the level of maturity so also needs more updated legislations that comes probably from organizations like MB or brands. But also I think, yeah, what we can say based on the experience that, yeah, some of the industries, I can say the big industries will be involved in LCA projects. Yeah, we will have also some kind of case studies available for a better decision making in the near future, and yeah, updating our legislations in New Zealand. So I think it's the steps that both organizations and industries need to get involved, and and we are Toitū somewhere that we encourage both sides of partnerships.
Lisa, final comment there, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do believe that there's two sides to this that there's a bit of tension. There's do we get more granular with our reporting and ensure that that's completely robust and all of our resourcing is attributed to how well we're managing that reporting in line with global commitments, which is important. But that I find that sometimes detracts from the impactful work on the ground. So in terms of where New Zealand is in that conversation, there are so many innovative opportunities here that may or may not align with global reporting requirements at this stage. And I think the benefit that we have in terms of, looking at this from a robust perspective and liaising quite closely with teams like Toitū is we can kind of test some of those reporting aspects and the methodologies associated, particularly with the Scope 3 aspects, to really streamline that process so it's not the one thing that sustainability teams are focused on. I think if we get another acronym for reporting, we'll probably all go mad. So the idea behind working really closely with our procurement aspects of our business and really working to find out, the root cause of some of the challenges with, the impacts of carbon in our industry is where the focus should be. And so if it aligns seamlessly with reporting requirements, fantastic, happy days. But if it doesn't, the impactful work shouldn't come at shouldn't be sacrificed over the reporting obligation. So, but fortunately, teams like yours are really taking that on board and providing really flexible solutions to how we report Scope 3. So yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Lisa. Just got a question here from, I hope I'm saying this right, Tapio. So regarding construction waste, so Josh and Abbas, one might be for you, but Lisa, you might have some insight into what Precinct are doing as well. So do we have any examples of how waste reduction on site was managed and tracked and verified, given that most work on the development site is done by subcontractors? I'm curious as to whether there's checks in place to confirm waste minimisation practices at the subcontractor level.
Okay, I think, yeah, from the LCA perspective, I can answer this shortly. So about the data, so data validation is really important for waste minimization, and the streamline that you also follow and the way that LCA needs to measure that and give you an advice that how it should be probably developed for a better reduction. So I can say it's case-by-case scenarios. We need to, based on your specific project, your platform, your facilities, go through that. And also, as you mentioned, yeah, there are some kind of like sub contractors for the waste management system in New Zealand. So probably that side also need to be pushed by, I can say, the owner of the project to get more involvement or better data from the subcontractors. But As long as we have the data available, it can be included in the LCA, and the measurements will be perfectly fine. About details of different stages of the waste minimization for different stages of the life cycle. Also, the life cycle tools doesn't have really any limitations on that. So, but it needs to go through the validation of the data.
Josh, anything to add?
No, I think he's covered it off.
Cool. And Lisa, about examples from Precinct's perspective.
Yeah, so I'm fairly new to Precinct, but I do know that traditionally, C&D waste, so construction demolition waste, is just a massive challenge in terms of transparency anywhere in the world. And without knowing the extent of the challenges in New Zealand, it really does come down to really developing strong partnerships with your waste contractors during that process, the builders, to ensure that they're tracking the elements of which streams are going where, and just building in that expectation around transparency with the process. And, conscious that as soon as there's a higher dollar figure associated with waste to landfill, particularly construction waste to landfill, there tends to be a lot more transparency with recovering those costs. So I do find that you do see a lot more in terms of transparency when there's a considerable cost associated with disposing of that waste. But it is an opportunity in terms of turning those products around into, reused or recoverable materials as well. So I think, to tackle some of that, yes, it might be encouraging more transparency with the supply chain, but I also think we should be looking more at circular solutions as well, and getting in really early on with those solutions. So it's not after the fact, what are we doing with these materials, understanding that they're going to landfill. So a few things, but it is a big topic and one close to my heart. So looking forward to seeing what we can do at Precinct for our development pipeline.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Lisa. There's a couple of questions here on the LCA tool. So Ben and Roger, thanks for that. So is the LCA tool a competitor to NZGBC tool, Brands tool, and other commercial tools? And if so, is it intended to align with these and what MB has proposed in its Building for Climate Change guidance? So I think I'll acknowledge the tool and competitor side of things. Obviously, there's a lot of tools out here in the market, and I think from our perspective anyway, it's just finding one that works for you as an organisation. Abbas, do you want to talk about the alignment with MB and the Building for Climate Change?
Sure. So I can say in generally, as an LCA practitioner, or what can I say, expert on data and LCA. So we don't see any kind of competition as long as 2 + 2 is 4. So LCA, when we call tool, is actually a methodology to bring the measurement for your carbon footprint. So as long as the LCA methodology is scientifically, technically based on the ISO standards and verification has been delivered correctly, I can say it's a perfect LCA measurement, and doesn't matter you want to calculate it with just pen and paper or on the best data tools that you have it. What we can say here, Toitū, we aim to reduce those hustle and bustles for industry. And if even you have some kind of even in-house or external LCA measurements, our tool is able to transfer to your data for a better measurement and next for the certification of your carbon reduction. So even doesn't matter if you have done before any kind of like LCA or any kind of other certificates, still our LCA tool is able to transfer those data and bring it based on, again, what you need. You need to go through the reduction of the carbon for industry, a better solution for your next design, kind of like certification, or if you have some challenges you want to go through to see what is the best solution for that based on LCA practice. So I don't see any competition again between our tools that will be launched early next year and other current available tools internally in New Zealand or even internationally. There are some other overseas-based websites, softwares or web-based softwares, and also programs. So I can say there is no competition, and your data, even you have done any kind of like LCA and certificates, still our tool will be able to transfer those data for the future of your industry, a better decision, a better measurement.
Thanks, Abbas. Lisa, there's a couple of questions here for you. Oh, my screen's just moved down. Here we go. So how does Precinct track and measure the effectiveness / ROI of Green Star of new projects to check the real world energy use and emissions match the predictions of the rating scheme?
Great question. And I was very interested to discover that, so in Australia, when you go through the Green Star design as built and now new buildings process, there's a pathway around a neighbours commitment agreement. And so throughout that design process and delivery of the development, you're peer reviewed against that energy performance piece in particular. So once your building is operational, it's being peer reviewed. As long as the building is commissioned and tuned appropriately, your building should be performing in line with that neighbour's target. And so that's quite a common practice in Australia. We're voluntarily running those analysis for our developments here, but it would be really, really great to see, just as a more broader tool, that pathway within some of the tools to recognise the commitment upfront to do the analysis around how building systems perform in design and development and how they would respond once in operation. We know that there are different variables associated with a neighbours rating compared to the energy category of, say, Green Star. Obviously you should be targeting the most energy efficient processes that you can and the configuration of your services in line with that. But often it helps when you have a benchmark to aspire to. And so with the neighbours tool, we do see that quite prevalently. And at that stage during the development process, you do have the luxury of switching out equipment types or swapping equipment out that would be more efficient for you. And so to answer your question, we do track performance once our buildings are operational. We have a number of ongoing commitments. One of those is our reporting to the World Green Building Council metrics around Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. But we also have our enrolment into Green Star performance portfolio, of which we're assessing ongoing improvements at each annual cycle. The criteria is slightly different though when it comes to operations for a Green Star asset under that different tool, because it's purely focused on how you're managing the asset. So depending on which parameter the question was focused on, if it was for energy, we target neighbours energy improvements for the portfolio once they're operational, but then also acknowledge that if there's a set target in place from the development pipeline, we'll acknowledge it through operating that asset in line with how it's been commissioned and tuned. And then with the overarching commitment to continue to report on the portfolio across a number of different metrics. So there's quite a lot in that, but I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Just another question here from Anthony regarding a demonstration of the Toitū LCA platform. So as Abbas mentioned before, it's still a little bit of a work in progress. So Anthony reached out to us in the new year, and we can run you through what it looks like. We can do a live demonstration just for you. What have we got? Another one here. Has there been any updates on the steps or timeline to make embodied carbon calculation mandatory for building consents? With understanding this was to be introduced in 2025. Is this still the case?
Yeah, so we haven't got any updates necessarily at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot happening in the regulatory space at the moment. So we just have to watch the space and see how it all evolves. But currently, the timeline that I shared is the most up-to-date kind of information that we have available to us out of MB. And it will be once it gets implemented, it will be a very interesting piece, as Lisa was talking about, in terms of setting metrics that you want to achieve when it comes to neighbours. Similarly, setting metrics that you may need to achieve when it comes to embodied carbon would be a really great way to benchmark everyone and kind of reduce things across the board. So it's a very exciting piece, and hopefully, we get an update soon.
Thanks, Josh. Another question here from Forrest. This might be one for you here, Lisa. By choosing suppliers and partners who are also trying to reduce their carbon emissions, would it increase the cost of the build?
Ideally, no. It should. close the loop in terms of how we're being more resource efficient and responsible with the way that we're procuring and administering products and equipment within the construction phase. However, I'm conscious that because some of these standards are quite complex and some systems that we employ require a level of detail that some suppliers just don't have the resourcing to adequately respond to or incorporate within their business operations, that would make that investment pay off for the level of their engagement or contract on a project. So I think, as a property owner and developer, we have a responsibility to really articulate who's in that basket of high performance requirements in terms of, if it's a smaller contract, at what point do we say, on the ground, this is the expectation. However, from if it's an ISO 14001 requirement, or if it's an EPD requirement, or if it's, an additional measure purely from an environmental perspective, but it is not readily apparent in that particular segment of the market, what we have as a responsibility to ensure that there's still competition amongst suppliers to those projects where, the environmental credentials are not a limiting factor in their ability to contribute to that project. And it's a discussion that's ongoing internally at the moment, particularly around our social procurement framework. So making sure we're not precluding any parties based on the extent of what we need to have reported. I don't have an answer to that, but we're thinking very hard about how we engage more meaningfully with that criteria and the requirements associated with it. Ideally, we'd be choosing partners that also align with our values when it comes to our Scope 3 reductions, because that's where we see the biggest impact that we can have in that space, is to encourage and support our supply chain to navigate this space. How we do that is still something we're working on, but it is very front of mind.
Yeah, I can add just a short sentence about the LCA perspective of how, have available data from suppliers or the rest of the people that they're working with your industry. So it will accelerate or helps us to collect the data and finish the LCA measurement. However, for financial aspects of sustainability for building, I believe circular economy and also socioeconomic aspects of the LCA, this is what is important to be considered for the measurements, and our tool have some answers for these aspects of cost beside the sustainability achievements of the building projects. Sorry, we had another question that are we just talking about the building sector, or infrastructure always also is included or no? The answer is definitely yes. When we say C&D, so always meaning building and infrastructure. So we think about horizontal projects as well, not only vertical.
Oh, thanks, Abbas. Lisa, another one here for you from Jason. Are you formalizing relationships with your building occupiers with green leases to promote sustainable practices in maintenance?
Definitely. So our team are actively working with the PCNZ on the green leasing program that they're running at the moment. I'm also conscious that, green leasing in itself is not going to solve a lot of the challenges that we have with collaboration. Actions speak louder than contracts that nobody looks at. So we're looking at ways to formalize programs that would enact the requirements of a green lease to present to our occupiers as part of that engagement process, to then ensure that we're not scaring anyone off in terms of that engagement process. So if we're saying we will share and collaborate on performance targets, we want to be able to show what that actually looks like in practice, to ensure that it's not taken out of contracts by lawyers without thinking about what the benefits would be. So I do find that that's an effective strategy, particularly in Australia, when you first, coordinate your quarterly meetings, share data, work together in terms of green cleaning, things like that, and then work backwards into the leasing structure, particularly with existing clients. But for any forward clients that move into our buildings, we'll be definitely looking to formalize that approach, just with the outcome of the working groups associated with the green lease preparation. However, I am conscious that nobody really pulls out their lease and looks at it, particularly around those parameters, at least to my knowledge. And so we'd much rather speak with actions in that regard. So.
Perfect. And I'm sorry, Lisa, I'm going to have one more question for you. This one's from Lindsay. Can you please elaborate on the way in which Precinct... Oh, no, and it's just disappeared from my screen. Can you please elaborate on the way in which Precinct offsets its residual emissions and what steps it takes to minimise them first? Great
question. So we run life cycle assessments across our development pipeline, and we do that fairly early on in the process, just to ensure that we're making some really great decisions around the material and equipment and, building fabric and how we've positioned the asset, and also that adaptive reuse piece. So for One Queen, as a great example, there was a scenario around adaptive reuse or knocking One Queen down and building up again, and it became quite a big decision in terms of that embodied carbon piece. And in the end, the adaptive reuse component took precedence in that scenario. However, I'm conscious that with a longer lead time to actually influence the supply chain and to support the supply chain in adapting to some of those lower carbon material and equipment options, and just looking at, how we position the asset and all those things, like it does take considerable amount of time up front. So the best thing, and what we've heard from our consultants on our projects who have done an incredible job, is that just putting it, in front of mind for those project team members, that this is the expectation for each development, that we will be accounting for carbon in this project, and therefore you should keep in mind that those record keeping activities are quite important to us. And so there are some really great operators in New Zealand who specialize in this space, and we've certainly learned a lot from them in terms of when to insert interventions throughout the building and construction process to really optimize that embodied carbon reduction. But from a commercial perspective, because we do kind of live in a commercial reality around the property sector, is that as soon as you put a line item associated with your carbon intensity for a project, it becomes the development team's responsibility to reduce costs in that space, as well as reducing carbon. So it's a really great driver to ensure that all parties are keeping that front of mind in the process. So looking forward to publishing more case studies as we move through this work, because it is quite a new parameter, and our developments do take quite a long time to deliver in some cases. So once we're able to, we'll certainly look to publish some of the information coming out of those projects. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Lisa. And I feel like you've kind of answered the next question that I'm about to ask as well. So I'll send this one through to the Toitū team. So this question's from Ellie. Can you show percentage reductions using the whole building LCA method, or do you need to reference a design base case? Abbas, do you want to take this one first?
So yeah, we will first start. So first of all, okay, based on our legislation, so Toitū needs to go through the LCA of the completed projects. However, the design assumptions can be also considered based on, what can I say, the special projects. And we will go through the LCA measurements, giving some advice, and we will go after that, after completion of the project, to see what is exactly happened from LCA perspective and carbon measurements in that project, and compare it with the first design-based scenario. And that gives a better understanding for your industry that, your initial design, when it's happening for the construction and completion, how it's, close to the hypothesis or idea that you had from the beginning, from sustainability perspective.
Perfect. Thanks, Abbas. Spot on time. So that just about wraps it up. Thank you all for joining us today, and a special thanks to our speakers. We hope you all found it educational and insightful. Just a reminder, we'll be sending through the recording link and any responses to any of the unanswered questions. If you do have any further questions or would like to chat, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to help, and we'll send through some contact details in the recap email as well. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day. you.